How do you grow a newsletter from scratch beyond the obvious tactics? What can you post on Twitter and LinkedIn to attract followers? And how can you create innovative content that stands out and gets you noticed? Well, you're about to find out. Welcome to the I Want to Know podcast. My guest today is Jerrica Long. In addition to being one of my Skill Sessions Plus members, which makes her a personal favorite of mine, Jerrica is a content creator with over a decade of experience in entertainment, from working at studios and networks to writing an episode of television. Through her newsletter, The Laugh Strategy, she helps creative artists build sustainable careers, something that is near and dear to my heart as well. You can connect with her on LinkedIn and Twitter for insights on content creation, audience building, and her latest updates. Hey, Jerrica, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here.
I know. Jerrica and I have been going back and forth and exchanging emails. And like I said, I'm working with her as a Skill Sessions member, but this is the first time we're actually seeing each other and chatting, I think.
Mhm.
Well, actually, you were in a jam session, I think. So once
Yeah.
before. Really excited to talk to you. You've got great questions. And it's interesting. One of the things I'm going to do, which I'll get into in a second, is your questions are things that I've been asked a lot. And I have talked about them on this podcast before. But I was like, but wait a
Mhm.
second. There's a lot of stuff. I have a lot of answers to them that I've never talked about before. So this episode, I'm going
Mhm.
to be sharing things and saying things that I've shared a lot of tips about how to grow to a newsletter, but I've never shared any
Right.
of the ones that I'm going to share in this one. So with that said, let's
Okay.
jump right into it. What is the first question you want to ask?
Yeah. What are some effective strategies for growing a newsletter audience from scratch, particularly in the comedy space?
So let's start with tell me and tell people who are listening, because obviously I know a little bit about it,
Mhm.
but other people don't. So talk a little bit about what your newsletter is, who your target audience is for it, and where you're at in the process with it.
Yeah. So it's called the Laugh Strategy. It's for people who want to build a comedic audience, who want to have eyeballs on their comedic content, or looking to build outside of the studio system with their content creation, whether they're a writer, a producer, whatever the case may be, but they understand that they need an audience to do that. And it just doesn't need social media. Pretty much my goal is to find those people because I'm a creator myself and I'm building that. And so I want to learn with others and share what I'm learning.
And the newsletter, like, what's the sort of format? I know you're sharing strategies
Yeah.
of
Mhm.
well-known people. So, for example, like how Kevin Hart got where he is, or
Yeah.
Issa Rae, or talk a little bit about what the
Mhm.
content currently is and will be.
But right now, it's deep dives into these content creators, into people like Liz Koshy, people who built this comedic audience on social media and expanded outside of social media, just finding those gems that are doing it on their own terms and how they
Mhm.
got there. So just reverse engineering that process and breaking down what worked for them and maybe even what didn't work so they can avoid those pitfalls.
And one thing I would say, it's funny because when we first started talking and you were telling me about the newsletter, I immediately went to two
Mhm.
reference points and you were like, yep, that's it. And the
That's
two
it.
were one
Mhm.
is there's a great newsletter by Dan Runcie called Trapital that does
Yep.
something similar, but focused on the music industry and
Mhm.
really hip hop, actually, more so than just the music industry in general. And then the other one is Chanel writes a great newsletter called Growth in Reverse that is basically talking about how really successful newsletters have grown and done their thing. So you're doing a kind of similar approach with the newsletter, but aimed at
Mhm.
comedians and comedy creators, which I think is really smart. And as someone who's used to work in comedy, I think there's a big audience for that. Talk to me a little bit about how you are currently thinking of defining, like, how will you define success for the newsletter? Right. So, like a year from now, what are you looking for to have happen from it?
I would brand sponsorships. I think sponsorship deals and just building I want to build a community around the laugh strategy. I want to build a thriving community of people who feel like there's a common connection because going after your dreams is no joke. And so I want people to
Mhm.
connect. I want to figure out how to take it outside of a newsletter and really build a community around the newsletter, but also brand sponsorships.
We did not plan this, but I love that the brand sponsorships is separate, but I love that you brought up community because that's going to be one of the first
Yeah.
things that I actually talk to you about when I get into some tips. So let me sort of
Okay.
run down some ideas and suggestions I have for you. The first thing I want to say is, like I said, I talked a lot about newsletter growth strategies and I've shared a lot of them
Mhm.
before in episodes of this podcast and other places. So anyone that's listening to this, I want to give two episodes I've done in the past in my archives that I highly recommend you listening to if you're interested in this topic. So in episode 11, I actually had comedian Zarna Garg on, who it's funny because she was an up and coming comedian and now she's been opening for Tina Fey and Amy Poehler. And
Mhm.
it's crazy what can happen in a couple years and well deserved. And she's a former client of mine. I used to work with her. And so I had her on in that episode and we talked a lot about how to grow your audience and especially how to convert social media followers into newsletter subscribers. So I
Mhm.
recommend checking that one out. We'll put links in the show notes as well. And then in episode 14, I talked to Dylan Redekop about how to grow a newsletter to 10,000 subscribers from scratch. So both of those obviously right in line with what we're talking about, but I'm not going to repeat the stuff that I said to them, but I do recommend anyone who's interested, go check that out. Okay, so new stuff. So I want to share 5 newsletter growth strategies that I've never shared before. And the first one is start a community for subscribers to share what's working for them. And now when I say community, that could be a Facebook group, it could be a Slack channel, it could be a group chat, although that might get unwieldy. It could be whatever you want, a message board, some sort of online community where they can connect with each other to get help, to talk about, especially anytime you have a newsletter, which yours is, that which is great, that has a clear transformation, right? These people are here and they want to get to here and they're trying to
Yep.
figure it out. And everyone who's reading this newsletter is trying to figure that out. And each of them are figuring out different pieces of the puzzle. Create a way for them to connect with, to help each other and share what they're learning or struggling with each other. And when you do that, I think a lot of times people think about community and newsletter separate, but I think especially in a case
Mhm.
like yours, these things can be interwoven from the very beginning. So when someone
Mhm.
subscribes to your newsletter, that should automatically get them access to the community. And by the way, I would make it a free community. You can talk about paid community down the
Yeah.
road or whatever, but initially I would have it be a free community and it's a sort of bonus for subscribing to the newsletter and vice versa. Some people may discover the community first, and so if they join the community, they get the newsletter. So an easy way to do this is, let's say it was, if you can do it with all different kinds of communities, but if you have people apply to join the community, so for example, in a Facebook group, you can ask them questions and you have one of those questions be, would you like to get my Laugh Strategy newsletter? Which if they're interested in this, they will. Have them drop their email address in there and then you can add them to your list. So I have a Facebook group that I started years ago called Newsletter Creators. And now the group kind of runs itself. I'm not super active in it, but it's a great community of these people. And I got a lot of newsletter subscribers because every time someone would join that group, one of the questions is, would you like to get my newsletter that shares tips on how to grow your newsletter? And of course they
Wow.
would,
Mhm.
right? So a community can not only be super valuable, but it can also be a great growth tactic for the newsletter, especially in a world where you are, where it's like a lot of these comedians know each other, right? So if that group is
Mhm.
good, they're going to talk and be like, oh, I'm in this great Facebook group or I'm in this Discord or whatever it is, right? And when they come in, now they realize there's a newsletter. And the opposite is true.
Mhm.
They get the newsletter, and in that welcome email, you're like, hey, here's your invite to join this community. And so it works really well and is a really good way to grow a newsletter. The second newsletter growth strategy that I haven't really talked about before is connect with people who are selling products to your audience. So I've talked a lot about cross promotions and people talk about cross promotions and newsletters recommending other newsletters and
Mhm.
that kind of stuff. But they don't think a lot about the people that are selling to that audience other than going to try to get money from them and trying to get sponsorships from them. But the truth is, anyone that's selling, in your case, comedians, anyone that's selling a
Mhm.
product to comedians has some list connection audience to comedians. And you have the ability to introduce their product to other comedians. And there's value. So yes, there's the typical sponsorship of, oh, give me money and I'll promote your product to my thing. But for you,
Mhm.
especially when you're starting out, if they can send you subscribers, that's as valuable as money in especially in the early days, right? So,
Mhm.
for example, you could reach out to, and I don't know if anything off the top of your head. Well, I'll give you an example, right? Maybe this is not the best example. It's not comedians only, but it's valid. So let's say you went to some screenwriting software company. There's lots of
Mhm.
people that are writing scripts, comedy scripts, all that kind of stuff. You went to them, you said, hey, I have this newsletter. It's all about how comedy creators can make it in Hollywood, blah, blah, blah. I would be happy to promote your screenwriting software free of charge in exchange for you mentioning my newsletter on social media or into your email list, in your
Yeah.
newsletter, or whatever. They won't all
Mhm.
do it, but some of them will. Because for them,
Yep.
why not? And maybe go, hey, you know what? Hey, screenwriting company software, I'll mention you the next 4 issues. I'll mention you. You'll
Mhm.
be a sponsor, but I don't need your money. All I want you to do is email the 10,000 people in your email list or whatever it is. So viewing
Mhm.
brands or companies or anyone that's selling a product to your target audience as a potential promotional partner, really good way to grow your audience. The third growth strategy here that I haven't talked about before is what I'll call partnering up. So, what I mean here is find 3 to 5 to 10 to even just one would be helpful, right? Find similar creators whose
Mhm.
target audience is comedians. Maybe they have a newsletter, maybe they have a YouTube channel, maybe they're on Instagram, maybe they're on TikTok, wherever it is. They're trying to reach the same people. Find people that you can partner with to grow together because they're out there. And it doesn't have to be, yes, you could do a one off cross promotion, but ideally you go, look, the three of us are trying to grow to this audience. We're each bringing new people into our audience all the time. We're each figuring out things that work. And let's just informally agree that we're going to work together. We're all at maybe roughly the same amount of audience size right now. And we all have around, I'm making this up, but we all have around 500, 1,000 people on our email list or whatever it is. We all want to get to 10,000. Let's do it together. And we'll share each other's content. We'll just a sort of informal thing. And it can be really successful. And what a lot of people don't realize is a high percentage of people that have built huge audiences did it in part by doing this. They didn't do it alone. They partnered with other
Mhm.
people and they grew together. And as anytime any one of you has a spike, it benefits all of you. So finding some
Yeah.
partners would be a good thing. And for you in the comedy space, like a couple just off the top of my head that came to mind, there's a guy named Matt Ruby in New York.
Mhm.
Great guy who writes
I
the
follow.
newsletter for
Yep.
comedians, right? Reaching out to him and be like, hey, what we do is
Mhm.
different, but similar. Can we help each other in some way? And Joel Byers is another guy who I
Yeah.
believe is in Atlanta and he does stuff on YouTube. And he actually has a community of, I think he has a membership. I think it's a paid membership. I'm not sure, but I know he's tapped
Mhm.
into comedians and he's more focused on helping them. I think a little bit with the business, but I also think with their act and all that kind of stuff. But there are people out there. And so finding them and all you need is a couple partners can really help you go a long way. The fourth newsletter growth strategy that I haven't talked about much before is build relationships with what I call offline community connectors. So everyone is always so focused on how do I find the people that have the followers, the subscribers? They're always focused on the online stuff. And depending on your niche, they completely overlook that there's offline people that have connections that are just as valuable. So, especially I know from having worked in the comedy world and booking comedy shows and stuff, in every city, there are those people who are booking the local comedy shows. The indie comedy, they're the booker, they're the producer, they're the what they run
Mhm.
the room, they own the venue, whatever. But in every city, there's a handful of those people. And those people know and have interactions with every stand up in the city all the time.
Yeah.
Which means if you reach out to that person who books, like I know from being in LA, there are people, and forget not just the clubs, like not the big Hollywood improv comedy store, or whatever, but like local indie shows that they're interacting with these comics all the time. They have their emails, they have their everything. And if you can go to them and be like, hey, I have this thing, I know they're really going to like it. Check it out. If you like it, tell people about
Mhm.
it, spread the word. Right. And, or maybe depending what it is, maybe you're like, oh, I'll sponsor your show. I'll give you, it's a small indie show,
Mhm.
whatever, or promote it, whatever you can do. But those people, when you start to think about offline, who's talking to all of the people that I want to reach, they're really valuable. And no one's reaching out to them to do that. No one's reaching out
Yeah.
to like the local indie comedy show producer to do anything. Hey, can I put
Mhm.
flyers on the tables in the green room, in the
Yeah.
whatever? Like it's easy
Mhm.
stuff and it doesn't have to cost a lot of money and you can really get directly to your target audience. And then the fifth one, the last thing here that I wanted to suggest is pitch yourself to other comedians' podcasts and tell them you'll link to the episode in your newsletter if they book you. So with comedians,
Yeah.
obviously, every comedian these days has a podcast. And while a lot of their
Mhm.
audience are not other comedians, a lot of their audience are other comedians, especially smaller shows and especially shows that are talking about comedy. You can be a different type of guest for them. And especially with the type of content you're creating your newsletter, it doesn't matter that they don't know your newsletter or they don't know who Jerrica is.
Mhm.
You can go, hey, you have a show talking to comedians. You want me to come on and tell you what Kevin Hart did that worked? Like, you want me to give you the
Mm.
blueprint? A
Yep.
show that maybe is for screenwriters, like, you want me to come on and tell you what Issa Rae did and how she made this happen? That's
Yeah.
really interesting. And
Mhm.
it's good content for them. And I think there's a high likelihood that you could get booked. And that would, again, get you a lot of new newsletter subscribers. So those are the 5 things. Just to recap: start a community, connect with people selling products to your audience, partner up with a few other similar creators, build relationships with offline community connectors, and then pitch yourself to podcasts and show them exactly what value you would bring to them, and also promise them that you will promote it to your audience. So, any questions about any of that stuff?
No, I'm blown away. Like, that's never occurred to me at all.
There
Not
you go.
even what's crazy, like, I'll go to ChatGPT and think of ways to promote my
Mhm.
newsletter and stuff like that. ChatGPT didn't even come back with these ideas. So I don't know, Josh. You're onto something.
See, there you go. Well, and look, neither did I, right? Like I said, I've done a lot of
Yeah.
episodes talking about newsletter growth, and part of it was the challenge, right? Because I was like, well, I don't want to just come on and say the
Mhm.
same stuff I've said before, and I was like, well, what can I come up with that I've never said before? And I was like, oh yeah, that's a good idea, and that's a good idea, and that will work. So yeah, I'm
Yeah.
glad to hear it, and I think that reaction, and I think there's a bigger point here as well, is like the reaction of, oh, that seems obvious.
Yeah.
There's a lot for all of us, right? There's a lot of obvious stuff that we just
Mhm.
miss because we're not either pushing ourselves to think about it, or we're only looking through this filter of this is what I've seen others do. Right. And if you
Mhm.
pull back, like the way I come up with the idea of, well, go talk to the person that's running the local show is because I'm throwing out all the like online stuff and I'm going like, well, okay, all I want to, in your case, you want to reach comedians. Who is
Yeah.
reaching comedians? People selling
Yeah.
products to them, people booking them,
Mhm.
right? So I think for anyone that's listening to this, that too, when you know exactly who you want to reach, taking a step back and going, well, who is interacting with them? Who's currently
Yep.
reaching them? And how can I figure out a way to get to them through that? So, yeah, there you go. So let's get to your second question. What is the next thing you want to know?
Yes. How can I leverage LinkedIn and Twitter to achieve a target of 10,000 followers? I know the number's like crazy, but you have to have a goal.
Well, the first you do have to have a goal, and I think the first thing is you have to not think it's crazy. The first
Yeah.
thing you have to do is you have to believe like it's possible. It's funny just thinking about that now. Rick Rubin, the famous music producer, among other things,
Mhm.
I was watching him interviewed in something, and he had a great point. And they were talking to him about what's it been like working with like Johnny Cash. He's worked with so many sort of legendary
Yeah.
people who have had all this success and done all this stuff even before him. And one
Mhm.
of the things that he said is like one of the most important things is they have to believe that their best work could be ahead of them. It
Mhm.
seems obvious, but if you're Johnny Cash or whatever, and when he worked with Johnny Cash, had probably been at the peak of his career and had gone down the other end and
Mhm.
whatever, or whatever, if it's a band who's had some massive hit before, some part of them doesn't actually believe that their next album could be their best album or their most successful
Yeah.
album or whatever, which is only natural, right? And it's very natural to
Yeah.
go, yeah, I want 10,000 followers. I know that seems like a lot, like to kind of undercut yourself. Again, it's human nature, but that
Right.
human nature actually holds us back from getting it. Like you have to really believe that it's not a
Yeah.
ridiculous goal, right? We all do. Again,
Yeah.
I'm not like, so we all do that. And that plays out in a variety of different ways, not just audience size, but what people charge and all sorts of stuff. It doesn't mean you have to be like, oh, I can definitely do this. And it doesn't mean if you don't get to 10,000 followers or whatever, that it's a failure. It doesn't mean any of that.
Right.
It just means you have to be like, yeah, I want this and it's possible. Not easy. It might take me a long time, might
Mhm.
whatever, but like possible. So let me ask you a question. So you said 10,000 followers. Do you mean social media followers? Do you mean email subscribers? Do you mean
Okay.
on one platform,
My
across multiple platforms? Like, what do you mean when you say
That's great. So for LinkedIn, my goal is 10,000.
okay?
For Twitter, I don't know. I'm fine with the followers that I have, as long as it's the right followers. I also
Mhm.
understand having the right people follow you is
Yep.
more important than just having a number. So I
Yep.
completely understand that too. But I also understand I'm a social strategist. Like I understand reach and engagement and
Mhm.
views and impressions and all of that and what that means to a person. So follower count does weigh into that. So
Okay.
my goal, 2,500 subscribers for my newsletter this year, and then
Okay.
10,000 followers on LinkedIn. Twitter, it's whatever for me, honestly,
Okay.
but LinkedIn is 10,000 within a year. So I'm giving myself a year to get 10,000 followers on LinkedIn, but I want to have
And how many do you have right? How
2,500
many do you have right
subscribers.
now?
I think I have 2,600.
Okay.
I have,
So roughly like four times you want to 4x your LinkedIn follower. Okay.
yeah,
Why is there what do you think's going to happen when you have 10,000 followers? What do you think that's going to
yeah.
unlock or change?
Well, there's opportunities. Well, I work in social media. So I
Mhm.
understand that there's a threshold for these brand sponsorship deals and stuff like that. And a lot of them are 10,000 followers. There's also
Mhm.
different creator programs that you can get into where you have to have at least 10,000 followers to even qualify to apply. I dealt with that earlier this year when I applied to the Issa Rae program. I had to have 10,000
Mhm.
followers. So I want that number to open those doors for me. But I also know
Okay.
that number doesn't matter when it comes to the other goals,
Right.
right? Just having the right followers is what matters.
So I'm going to give you I love that answer because I'm going to both say that answer represents the like most common mistake I see people make, but then I'm also going to say that answer
Oh,
is infinitely better than the answer that most people give. So you actually hit
okay.
both sides. You actually are hitting both sides of the equation. You're actually so normally when people say I want X amount of followers and I ask them why and I go, what's going to
Mhm.
happen when you hit that amount of followers? Their answer is usually not great. Either they're like, I don't know, like I want more, it's going to
Yep.
look good, or it's going to whatever, right? Or they'll say some version of what you said where you're like, oh, well, that's going to make it easier for me to get sponsors or whatever, which is not necessarily wrong. But what I would say in that, had you only said that part of the answer, I'm going to take the second part of your answer later.
Okay.
Had you only said, I want 10,000 followers because that's going to make it, that's going to help me get sponsors. What I would have said to
Mhm.
you is, well, then the goal is actually getting sponsors.
Mm,
Followers is a
okay.
step to accomplishing that goal. It might help you.
Mhm.
It probably will help you. You got to make sure you optimize for the right goal. So if the end, a lot of times people optimize for steps toward the goal as opposed to the goal.
Right.
So if the goal is sponsors,
Mhm.
you want to optimize for sponsors, not for followers,
Right.
right?
Right.
So there's
Mhm.
overlap there, but it's not the same because the truth is, if you got 10,000 followers and didn't get
Mhm.
sponsors, you would not be celebrating. If
Right.
you got
Right.
3,000 followers but got sponsors, you'd be celebrating. So your actual
Mhm.
goal is sponsors. So that's the first
Mhm.
thing is you always want to make sure that whatever goal you set for yourself, you're actually aiming at the sort of end goal and not just aiming at like a step along the way, which may or may not. That's a theory. You're having the
Right.
theory that 10,000 followers is going to help you get sponsors, and it's probably correct. Doesn't mean it'll happen, but it's not necessarily wrong, but it's a theory. Whereas if you had sponsors, you'd have sponsors. Speaking of sponsors, there's
Right.
another episode of my show with Justin Moore, who's like sponsorship king.
Mhm.
We'll link to it in the show notes. He gives like a master class on how to get sponsorships and all that. And he also talks about sort of followers being overrated when it comes to that. But I'll let you guys go watch that and listen to him talk about that. But the second part of your answer, I think, is actually really unique. And it's the first time you actually gave legitimate justifications for why 10,000 followers would matter. So the Issa Rae program, I guess it was like the LinkedIn creator program or whatever, that's legitimate. You're right.
Right.
Okay. If you need 10,000 followers to get into those things, then you need 10,000 followers to get into those things. And there's a reason that your number is 10,000 and not 20,000 or 5,000 or whatever, right? That's
Mhm.
the other thing when it comes to followers. People tend to pick completely random numbers and go, well, if I have this number and there's no reason, you actually have a reason for it. And you have things that you want that will be unlocked potentially by doing. So that second part of the answer, I think, makes the goal much more legitimate and good. And I think is the
Mhm.
piece that's missing from most people. So that totally makes sense to me. Talk to me about who you want. You said primarily LinkedIn. So talk to me about who
Yeah.
you want to follow you on LinkedIn.
And this is the trouble that I'm having because comedians are on LinkedIn. Comedy
Mhm.
creators are creating there's all these corporate funny people who are finding their audience
Mhm.
on LinkedIn, right? To make people laugh. I get it. They're there. They don't post unless they're the comedy creators who are the corporate content creators.
Well,
So
I
I'm
was going to say
struggling.
most people on LinkedIn don't post, even non-comedians. Like
Yeah,
the stat is it's like 95% or something of people never post.
that's so insane. But
Yeah.
there's comedy groups, there's comedian groups on
Mhm.
LinkedIn. They're trying to build community, and I don't know. That's
Mhm.
also part of the problem. I don't know. But I've only been posting about my news. I posted my news like a couple of times on my LinkedIn. It's featured
Mhm.
on my LinkedIn, and I already have, I don't know, 25
Mhm.
subscribers. So I don't know.
So the first,
That's what I'm trying to figure
so the
out.
first thing I would do is, assuming it's comedians and it's ultimately, let's say you want to attract the kind of people that are going to want to read your newsletter. So
Hmm.
the first thing I would try to do if I were you, and this is impossible to do completely accurately. So it's a total estimate, whatever. I would try to get some sense of how big. So if we describe your target audience as comedians, I
Yeah.
would want to get some sense of, well, how many comedians are actually on LinkedIn? Because, and you're never going to know, but if you're like, okay, the biggest groups, like the biggest LinkedIn groups for comedians or the biggest profiles or whatever that have the most comedians following them on LinkedIn, are only, I'm making this up, a couple thousand people. Like
Mhm.
you might be trying to get 10,000 comedians to follow you on a platform that only has 10,000 comedians on it. I don't know if that's
Right.
true, but again, you're only going to get, no matter how amazing you are, you're only going to get
Right.
X percentage of any niche, right? So I would want to look into it a little bit and just go like, all right, well, again, you're never going to know, but how big
Right.
is this potential audience to begin with? And am I fighting
Y
a bet? Like in terms of 10,000 followers, you might look
Right.
at it and you go, okay, I'm going to have to go a little broader because I'm never going to hit 10,000 just comedians
Right.
on here. And
Right.
then you can think about, well, what are the adjacent things? Who else might like my newsletter, right? Okay, well, if it's comedy showrunners, if it's entertainment
Mhm.
industry, like that broaden, you can broaden out in a few different ways. But I think that's important to do because otherwise you're setting yourself up for frustration where you might be
Yes.
really successful. You might get to a point where 50% of all the comedians on LinkedIn are following you and it's still not enough. And then it's
Yeah.
further complicated because if they're on there, but they're not really active on there, are they even consuming stuff on there?
Yep.
So when you had first said LinkedIn, I was, and again, I haven't been actively doing stuff in comedy for a few years. I was a little thrown
Yeah.
because I was like, oh, are comedians
Yeah.
even on LinkedIn? Like
Yeah.
it seemed like an uphill battle if you need 10,000 followers. But
Right.
I could be wrong. So the first thing I would do is I would try to gauge that. And another way to gauge it is if you're saying there's groups in there. So if there's
Mhm.
a really good active group, you could look at
Yes.
it and go, even as a starting point and go, okay, this group has, do you know how many people are in the group?
I wanna say there's a group that has 15,000, there's a group
Okay.
that has 5,000, so
Okay. So let's say there's a
okay.
15,000 group.
Yeah.
You could be like, well, could I get 5,000 of the people in this group to follow me? Like
Mhm.
almost have a micro goal and see like how much penetration you can get within that community and use that at
Mhm.
least as a metric. Here's a good test for you. You could go in that group today and you could go, I'm
Mhm.
going to look at the last 100 posts in the group.
Okay.
And I'm going to see of or even 50 posts, the last 50 posts of the group. And I'm going to see
Mhm.
of the people that posted them and the people that commented on them, how many of them are following or connected to me. And you go, okay, of
Yeah.
the last 50 posts, there's 200 people that either posted or commented or whatever. And of those
Mhm.
200 people, 20 of them are connected to me. Now, a
Wow.
month from now, go do it again. Go look at like the 50 most recent posts and
Right.
measure it. And that's an easy way to measure, are you gaining penetration within that community? And also it's a lead list, right? Because you could reach out
Right.
to or try to connect with every one of those people. You know exactly who they are.
Yeah.
So if you have a group of 15,000 of your target followers
Mhm.
and you can't get penetration with them, you're not going to get it outside of
Right.
the group. So that's where I would start and you
Mm.
build out like that. The other thing I would say is you mentioned LinkedIn and Twitter. My recommendation in general is focus on one platform first. If you
Okay.
decide like it's about LinkedIn, even if you're spending half an hour a day on Twitter, that's a
Right.
half hour that could have been invested in LinkedIn. And what
Mhm.
usually will happen is it's hard to grow on these platforms. It takes a lot of time and effort.
Mhm.
And usually what will happen is the more you focus that energy and effort, the faster you will grow. And people
Mm.
feel like, oh, but I'm missing opportunities. But here's the thing. Once you grow to whatever level you decide you want to grow to on that one platform, you could go, I'm not going to mess around with Twitter or anything else until I hit 10,000 LinkedIn followers. But once you do,
Mhm.
now you can tell 10,000 people, hey, I'm on Twitter. You can use the one you built to launch
Yep.
the other one, and it makes up for all the time that you weren't spending on Twitter because you can instantly
Mm.
grow, as
Yep.
opposed to trying to do both at the same time, which slows down your growth everywhere. So it doesn't have to be that way, but that's usually my
Yeah.
recommendation is focus on one platform first. The next thing I say, so talking about followers, and I think I have some suggestions here for you, but I just want to reference there's a book called Tribes by Seth Godin. Probably it's not specifically an audience growth book, but
Mhm.
it's actually, I think, like the best book I've ever read about audience growth and
Mm.
especially social media and content. And kind of his premise in the book is that he calls them tribes, but there are all these sort of tribes or communities of people that are already out there. And that your
Mhm.
job is not to attract people to follow you. Your job is to create a place for all the people that already have that shared interest to connect with each other.
Mm.
It's basically you saying, hey, we're gathering over here. Come on over here. And
Wow.
that when you do that, and when you view yourself not as trying to get them to follow you, connect you, but to
Mhm.
connect to each other, by default, you become the center of that community and the center of that tribe
Mm.
because you're the one that put up the flag and said, hey, over here. There's a great line in the book where he talks about, he says, The Beatles didn't invent teenagers, they just offered to lead them. The Beatles were not
Mhm.
attracting fans. They were saying, hey, all you people that believe this and don't want to cut your hair and do all this, whatever,
Mhm.
believe rock and roll, like over here,
Mhm.
we're all gathering over here.
Yes.
And that's what, but they became the center of it. Yes, they're making great
Mhm.
music and you have to do good stuff and all of that as well. But it's a really different mindset than the way most people approach content in social media. There is an existing community and tribe of comedians who care about business and
Mhm.
want to whatever. They're scattered. There may be some
Yes.
places where they're gathered, but for the most part, they're scattered.
Right.
So if you can use your accounts and your content and your whatever and your newsletter to be like, hey, people like you are over
Mhm.
here, you'll be at the center of it. Even though it's not about
Mm.
you, you're a connector. So a couple other things. Obviously, I've talked about some of this stuff in previous episodes. So I'm going to give a couple more links for people to check out. So in episode 23, I talked to Jamie Northrup and gave him advice about how to get actual value from Twitter. So if you're interested in Twitter, that's
Mm.
worth checking out. And then in episode 10, I interviewed Justin Welsh, who's like the world's greatest LinkedIn expert. And he shared a ton of valuable tips about how he uses LinkedIn. And he actually talked about Twitter because at the time he was just starting out on Twitter and now he's massive on Twitter as well.
Mm.
So the last thing I wanted to do here in terms of social media followers is, again, I wanted to share some tips that I haven't really talked about much, if at all, before. So I want to give you 4 ways you can attract more social media followers that are rarely talked about. So the
Mhm.
first is to create what I would call shows. So what I mean by this is you want to post recurring content types or formats that people know you'll regularly post. And that way, if they like one quote unquote episode, they'll want to see more. So Gary Goldman, a comedian, did this one year, a few years ago, where he, I think at the beginning of the year, like on January 1st, he was like, oh, I'm going to share a tip for comedians every day this year. And
Mhm.
every day he shared a tip for comedians, but and I forget exactly what he called it, but that packaging, he could have done that anyway and just been sharing
Yeah.
tips. But by turning
Yep.
it into the comedian tip of the day, he packaged it
Mhm.
in a way that it became a show. And people were like, oh, this guy does that every day. So when they saw a tweet now, they knew this guy does it every day. I'm going to
Yep.
go follow him versus, oh, it's someone who just happened to share a tip and they didn't know that, right? The packaging is so important.
Mm.
Sarah Cooper, who is someone you
Oh,
should
yeah.
look into if you don't know her already, she did this with like lip syncing Trump a few years ago.
Yep.
She went mega viral on Twitter. It was a
Yep.
bit, but it was basically a show, like, and people would want to
Mhm.
see. And then it got to the point where anytime Trump did something or said something crazy, there was like, people were like, can't wait to see Sarah's video of it.
Yep.
So
Yep.
coming up with those sort of shows can be really helpful in terms of getting followers because people know that you're going to do more of what they like. The second thing you can do to get more social media followers is to make content about something that already has a huge following. I see this on YouTube a lot now, and this is like my
Yeah.
favorite shortcut to giant audience. There are
Mhm.
YouTube channels that their videos are basically just like what's new at Costco. Costco's
Oh.
like deals of the whatever, and they get millions. I watched one the other day and it had 366,000 views in the first 12 hours. And all it was the guy basically going, hey, here's 10 great deals at Costco this month. And those videos are massive. And it's not because the videos are amazing, it's because they tapped into something that has a huge audience already. So if you
Mm.
create content, people are not watching that because of that guy or that video. They're watching it because they
Right.
love Costco and they're interested in Costco.
Mm.
So if you pick a thing or multiple things that people are already, a massive amount of people are interested in, it gives you a huge competitive advantage because they don't need to know Jerrica. They know
Right.
the thing and the thing attracts them and then they get introduced to Jerrica. Another example would be like if you did content about the Chicago Cubs, you can tap into a massive audience that's already interested in the Cubs. It's
Mhm.
just easier. And that's why, especially with comedians, if you were going to do a sketch or a bit that's a generic baseball bit, you should have it be
Yeah.
about the Cubs or the Yankees or the whatever, because all those Cubs and Yankees fans are going to be interested in it as opposed to this sort of generic
Mhm.
baseball thing. So if you look around and it is a mindset, if you start to think about all these things that have tons of attention. I think about it now all the time, ever since the
Yeah.
Costco thing. Like you drive past McDonald's and you'd be like, a lot of people are eating at McDonald's. A
Mhm.
lot of people love, hate, whatever McDonald's. Maybe I come up with a social media
Yeah.
thing about McDonald's and big audience there, right? Target any of these stores, any of these things, any of these shows, right? I'm going to
Yep.
pick a show on TV that people are, and you see this. There are massive YouTube channels built around and podcasts built around people talking about Game of Thrones
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
whatever it is. It's a really smart way to, again, a shortcut to building your audience. The third thing you can do to get social media followers showcase the people you want to follow you. So, for example, in your space, if you want comedians, you could easily
Yeah.
have a recurring thing on social where you share a joke of the day from a different comedian or a tweet of the day, or you name a comic of the day, or something where people who follow you have the opportunity to be featured. Imagine if every day you were highlighting a comedian that people should check out. And the only way to be considered for that is to be following you. You pick one of your
Mhm.
followers. Well, you've now given every comedian a reason, especially as your audience grows. And these things all feed on each other. And the other thing that's cool about that is the people that you feature will likely share what you said about. So there's some
Mm.
built-in virality. So every day I'm going, this, check out this comedian. He's amazing. And this
Mhm.
is his thing, whatever. Well, that comedian probably shares it. And who's following that guy? A bunch of other comedians. And they're seeing, oh, every day she's featuring someone, right? So that's
Mhm.
another sort of added bonus of that is, okay, maybe it's good content, but also it's a lot of those people are going to share it, right? And they're growing your audience. And then the last one here, the last thing you can do to get more social followers, this is again one of my personal favorites, is use your pin tweet as a connection point for a community. You could do the same on LinkedIn with a featured
Ooh.
post or something like that. So there's a
Mhm.
woman named Christina Garnett who is on Twitter at that Christina G. She has a pinned tweet that she had originally posted in 2020, and I will
Mm.
read you what it says because it's brilliant. So she works in marketing, community manager, that kind of
Mhm.
stuff, has had various jobs. So her pin tweet says, if you have less than 1,000 followers and work in marketing in some capacity, introduce yourself to marketing Twitter, say hi, tell us about yourself and what you like to tweet about, make friends. That post has
Mm.
3,900 comments and
Wow.
894 retweets since it was posted
Mm.
in 2020. And it is
So
all these people. And that is the perfect
Mhm.
example of what I was talking about in tribes. That's her going, hey, marketing Twitter people, we're connecting over here.
Mhm.
It's not about her. She doesn't say hi to me. She introduce yourself. She
Yep.
created a place for them to gather. And as a result, put
Mhm.
herself at the center of that community. You could
Wow.
easily do stuff like that, right? For
Mhm.
comedians to connect with each other. And again, not that hard once you do that kind of mindset shift to what you're doing.
Right.
So to wrap that up again, 4 ways to attract more social media followers. One, create recurring shows with your content. Two, make content about something that already has a huge following, like Costco. Number three, showcase the people that you want to follow you, and they will likely not only appreciate it, but then share it. And number four, use your pin tweet or pin post as a connection point for a community, the way Christina Garnett does brilliantly. Any questions about any of that?
No, that's great. I love well, I guess my question for you is like the franchise thing because I've had so many I'm a content creator myself.
Mhm.
So I've had all these ideas and I was going to do something around that, but trying to build a newsletter feels counterproductive to like my comedy creation aspects. Does that make sense? And I like the idea of a franchise, but I'm just trying to figure out like what it, like if is it what the franchise is in the laugh strategy sense of a newsletter. Like the example you gave about like McDonald's and like that
Mhm.
makes sense to me, right? You're talking about something that everybody knows about, so they care less about you. It's more about the thing. But how do you do that when you're building a newsletter? Does that make sense?
Well,
I'm trying to
but the
in
audience you want
comedy.
to attract is comedians. So you do it with
Right.
a franchise that ties to comedians. And I think
Okay.
let's get to your next question because I think my answer to that is going to give you some examples that are going to
Oh,
go right
good.
in line with what you're asking. So you're setting it up perfectly.
Perfect.
So let's
Yeah.
get to your last question. What is the third thing you want to know?
Okay. What are some innovative content creation techniques or trends in comedy that could help me stand out and connect with my audience?
Cool. So I'm going to have some specific ideas for you here, but I want to start
Oh.
with this gives me an excuse to talk about one of my, I don't even know, I don't even think I would call it a pet peeve, but it's one of the things that I see over and over again. And I always feel like people take the wrong lesson when it comes to content creation and a lot of other stuff. So here's what happens. And you see this pattern over and over again. Someone breaks out by doing something different, comes out of left field, totally new approach, new idea,
Mm-hmm.
new whatever, goes crazy, goes viral. Everyone else looks at it and goes, that was brilliant. And the lesson they take from it is doing it that way works. So they all rush to do the same thing. Best case scenario, it doesn't work as well. In most cases, it doesn't work at all. And they go, I don't understand. I did what that person did. But the reason it didn't work is because they took the wrong lesson. They think it broke out because of the way the person did it, or they did that video, or they did that lip, like Sarah Cooper, right? All these people went and did lip sync videos after Sarah Cooper. When they're
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, you do, that's the kind of content to make. But what they don't realize is that it actually broke out because it was different and nobody else was doing it, not because
Mm-hmm.
of the approach. So it's great to study and learn from what others are doing and what's working on the platform. But the real way that you break out is to do the thing that others are not doing, not to do the thing that
Mhm.
others are doing. So
Yep.
the actual lesson from breakout content is not to adapt the way they're doing content. It's that
Mhm.
they did something that no one else was doing. So what can I create? How can I come up with an approach that other
Right.
people are not doing and flies in the face of what everyone else is doing on these platforms? So with that in mind, I'm going to give you 4 ways to become a more innovative content creator, because I know that sounds easy, but it's not easy to come up with actually like new and different stuff. So the first way to become a more innovative content creator is you need to do things others aren't doing. And I think a great way to do that is with formats. The format of your content of all different platforms and all different things is highly underrated. A unique
Mhm.
format is a massive competitive advantage. So, for example, my newsletter is one paragraph. My podcast is people asking me questions instead of me interviewing the same people that have been on a million other shows.
Mhm.
Those are competitive advantages. My newsletter is inherently different. It won't be for everyone, but it's inherently
Right.
different and stands out from what most newsletters are. The podcast
Mhm.
is inherently different and stands out from what most podcasts are. So
Mhm.
whatever you're going to do, and this is true of social posts, it can be true of videos, it can be true of newsletter, any content that you do, figuring out how can I choose a format that is unique or that is different. You don't
Mm.
have to, but if you can have a unique format, it gives you an advantage. My newsletter shares tips to help people get clients from their content. Lots of people do that, but mine's a little different because it's only
Right.
one paragraph, right? So the format,
Mhm.
you can get away with doing things that aren't necessarily innovative if you package them in an innovative or unique way. The second
Mhm.
way to become more innovative content creator is to experiment often. So
Mhm.
your content is going to miss more than it hits. This is what also holds people back from experimenting. They go, oh, I
Mhm.
tried this and I tried that and it's not working. It didn't work and blah, 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 blah. If you go into it and you go, look, most of my stuff isn't going to work, but it doesn't
Mhm.
matter. I don't need it to. All you're doing is looking for a couple things and maybe even one thing that worked really well. A single hit
Mm.
can send you off in a direction that turns out to be all that you need. So if you go into it going, as opposed to I'm trying to get every post to work, if you go into it and go, I'm going to try 100 posts that are really unique and weird and different. And
Mhm.
all I'm hoping is that 1 out of the 100 clicks. I don't care if 99 fail. It's a really different approach to content. And once you do that, now you can start thinking in those terms. So if to put it as a comedian or stand-up world, test premises. A one-off
Mhm.
joke doesn't get you much, but a
Right.
premise has infinite potential. A premise could be built into an entire special. A premise
Mhm.
could be built into an entire sitcom. So the
Mhm.
difference between testing a one-liner joke and testing a premise, the upside is way
Mm.
higher on the premise. If you approach your social content in that way, where you're like, I'm looking for formats or
Yeah.
premises or things, you could go
Mhm.
in and you go to use what we talked about before. You could go, I like this idea of building around a brand or something that people know, right? A Costco, a McDonald's, a
Mhm.
Chicago Cubs. You go, I'm going to do 100 pieces of content about 100 different known entities and I'm going to see what clicks, knowing that it
Wow.
doesn't matter if most of them don't click. But I'm looking to
Mhm.
find that thing because someone would have done that. Like someone could have done the, okay, I'm going to do 100 different stores. Here's the best products at Costco. Here's the best products at Target. Here's the best products at whatever. And they might have stumbled into, oh my God, this Costco one people were really into. Maybe I should do more
Mhm.
Costco's. That's the value of a premise versus a one off sort of piece of content. Number three, third thing you can do to create more innovative content, the more specific you get, the more innovative your content becomes. So most people,
Mm.
when they create content, it's way too vague in general. This is why you see all the generic like self-improvement stuff.
Yep.
And people are
Yep.
like, whatever.
Next. Yeah.
If you get more specific, it automatically becomes different. And so I'll give you an example
Mhm.
again in your space. You could create a piece of content that was something about this is what it's like to do stand up. Or you could create that same piece of content and have it be this is what it's like to do stand up on open mic night at the Hollywood Improv. Some people who don't relate to an open mic night or the Hollywood Improv aren't going to care. Your
Right.
target audience
It's
who
gonna care.
knows what that's like is going to be
Mhm.
way more interested in that than this is what it's like to do stand up. They might be interested in both, just like self-improvement fans might be interested in both generic and the specific, but the specific is going to stand out way, way more.
Wow.
And then the fourth thing here, the fourth way to create innovative content is parody the world of the people you want to reach. So this is where I was going to get
Mm.
into. Here's some specific examples where you're like, okay, but how do I do this for comedians and my audience? So I'll give you a couple examples. Years ago, there were some comedy filmmakers who had been signed. I forget what agency it was, but they were signed by one of the big talent agencies.
Mm.
And but nobody really knew who they were. The industry didn't know
Mhm.
who they were. And they wanted the industry, their target audience was the industry. I need the
Right.
industry to know who we are.
Mhm.
So they made a short film that they put up on YouTube or whatever. It was basically a YouTube video. And it was a parody of life inside, I forget what agency it was, inside like CAA or UTA or
Mhm.
one of the big agencies. Hacked with inside jokes that people that work at
Mhm.
agencies would know,
Mm.
references to people and whatever. So what do you think happened? Everyone that worked at
That's
every
it.
agency saw the
Yeah.
video because it was
Yeah.
speaking to their hyper thing.
I
Deadline,
used to work at
Variety.
CAA. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Deadline and Variety
Yeah.
posted the video. That's specific. It's
Yep.
specific and it's parodying the world that they know. So if you want something
Mm.
to spread among comedians, it's like an inside joke, right? Or inside
Yeah.
baseball. Like you don't care about anyone else, but you want every
Mm.
comedian to go, just like I said, like open mic night at the Hollywood Improv is different than a
Yes.
general thing about stand up. So the more
Mhm.
inside it gets, the better, the more likely it is to spread. Trung Fan is a guy who's built a huge, massive Twitter following. He
Mhm.
pokes fun at tech and startup culture. So it's just very specifically that. Another thing you can do here is you can leverage what's being talked about and popular online in that moment and put a unique spin on it. Whatever it is in the news, like maybe everyone's talking about the Olympics, but your audience is comedians. So maybe you do some stuff about if you had to be a comedian to be an Olympic athlete, right? If the Olympics were just
Mm.
comedians against each other, what would
Mhm.
that be like? But it's just coming back to that thing and getting specific. People can't resist it, just like that agency video. It doesn't
Right.
even matter. That agency video, the agency video happened to be very good, but it could have been mediocre. It could have been
Right.
mediocre, but it was so
Mhm.
inside. They'd be like, do you see what the CAA video said about UTA
Yeah.
or whatever
Right.
it is? It's people are going to talk about it and really smart. So there you go. 4 ways to create more innovative content. 1, do things other people aren't doing, especially with formats. 2, experiment often and aim and test premises. 3, the more specific you get, the more innovative it becomes. And then 4, parody the world of the people that you want to reach. Questions about any of that? Does that help answer what you were
Ooh.
wondering before about how you
Yeah.
actually apply it?
This is helpful. Like,
Cool.
can't wait to try all these things and get back to you on what works
Yeah,
and how
no,
it went.
please do. And look, and that's the thing,
Mhm.
right? And look, that's the I'm glad you said that because it's a good note for us to end on is you're not going to create good content if you're not excited and having fun doing it. And
Mhm.
it seems basic, but there's a lot of people that
Mhm.
hate the content they're creating.
Yeah. Yes.
And it's not going to work.
Oh.
So it's forget the best
Mhm.
practices, forget what everyone else is telling you to do. Like at a baseline level, go create something that you're excited to create and share because you have a much better chance of it working than, well, I guess I need to do it this way and the way everyone else is doing it.
Mhm.
It's just not going to work. So, Jerrica, tell everybody where they can get your newsletter, follow you, connect you, find you. I have comedians in my audience, so I'm sure some of them
Hey.
are going to be especially interested in this. So, where can they track you down?
Yeah, Jerrica Long on LinkedIn. You can subscribe to my newsletter there for right now as I'm building the website. And then at Jerrica says underscore across all social media platforms.
Great. And for me, thanks everybody for listening. My newsletter for theinterested.com/subscribe. My skill sessions, joshspector.com/sessions. I'm on Twitter at jspector. I'm on LinkedIn. You've already tuned off because the episode is over. So I'm talking to myself. Thanks again, Jerrica. Thanks everyone
Thank
for
you.
listening and watching. I will see you or be in your AirPods next time.